He told everyone he built the house, threw parties, gave speeches like he was some kind of self-made man. But the truth? I paid for every brick with the money my dad left me. Then one day, I found papers in his desk, ones that would have erased my name from everything. You won't believe who he was giving it to. It was a Saturday in early May, the kind of afternoon where the sun feels warmer than usual, and the smell of grilled ribs drifts through the neighborhood like a promise. Our backyard was full of neighbors, old friends from Tom's work crew, and a couple of his cousins who always showed up when free beer was involved. Folding chairs were scattered across the lawn, kids ran barefoot through the sprinklers, and the cooler was packed with enough Bud Light to make the garage fridge jealous. Tom stood by the grill, spatula in one hand, beer in the other, playing king of the castle. He was laughing louder than necessary at every joke, telling the same story about how he closed the deal on this house back in 2014, right before the market jumped. Everyone nodded like he was some financial wizard. I stood nearby, holding a tray of deviled eggs and smiling like it didn't bother me. Because that's what you do when you're a good wife. You smile. But inside, I was tired. Tired of the way he talked like I wasn't there when the house was bought. Like I hadn't used my father's life insurance, the money he left me when he passed from cancer, to make the down payment. Tired of pretending I didn't hear the little digs. Lena's lucky I handle the finances. Or she's not really into numbers. Funny, because before Mia was born, I was an accountant. Ran the books for 3 local businesses and helped half our friends do their taxes every spring. But after the second miscarriage, I stopped working. We agreed I'd stay home full-time once Mia came along. Our family needs stability, Tom had said, and I wanted that too. I wanted to be present. I just didn't realize how quickly people forget what you bring to the table when you stop writing checks with your name on them. Around 5 p.m., Tom raised his red plastic cup and clinked it against a friend's. Here's to 10 years of building something real. This house, this family, this is all thanks to hard work and vision. A few folks clapped. Someone yelled, "Damn right!" I kept smiling, but my stomach twisted. He said, "This house," like it was a business deal. Like it wasn't a home I scrubbed from top to bottom, decorated, maintained, managed. I even resealed the deck myself last summer while he was out fishing with his buddies. Later that evening, once the guests were gone and the dishes piled in the sink, I went to his office to grab some trash bags. That's when I saw it half-tucked under a stack of envelopes near the printer. It looked official, thick paper, not the kind you get from junk mail. The heading read "Quitclaim Deed." My heart thumped a little faster. I didn't know what it meant exactly, but I knew what it sounded like. I sat down in his chair and unfolded the document. There was his name, and Ellie's, not mine. It looked like paperwork transferring ownership of our house to his sister. I blinked, reread it. It didn't say Tom and Lena. It said Thomas M. F. Fletcher as the grantor, and Eleanor Fletcher as the grantee. It was dated 3 weeks ago. I didn't breathe for a few seconds. My first thought was, this must be a mistake, a placeholder, or maybe a draft for refinancing, but my gut said otherwise. That cold, electric jolt of knowing, this is real, and it's bad. I put the document back exactly as I found it, took a picture with my phone. Then I walked slowly to the bathroom and threw cold water on my face. Tom came in about 10 minutes later, smelling like smoke and beer. "Great party, huh?" he said, kissing the top of my head. "You really outdid yourself." "Yeah," I said, drying my hands on a towel. Everyone seemed to have a good time. He opened the fridge and grabbed a soda. "You okay?" I nodded. "Just tired. Long day." He didn't notice the tremble in my voice. Or maybe he did, and chose to ignore it. Either way, I stayed quiet. That night, while he snored beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling fan, wondering what kind of man transfers ownership of a home behind his wife's back, wondering what kind of brother receives that kind of gift without asking why. The next morning, I waited until he left for a hardware store run before I pulled the document out again and checked the signatures. His name was there, inked in blue. Mine wasn't needed, because apparently The house was already listed under his name alone. I thought we were joint owners. Every time we talked about it, he said our house, or mortgage. But somehow, along the way, he'd filed paperwork listing only himself. I didn't want to panic. Maybe it was for refinancing, like he said. Maybe it really was nothing. But Ellie? Ellie had never liked me. She called me misaccounting behind my back, and once told Tom I was too uptight to be fun. She lived in a condo her mom paid for, and hadn't worked a full-time job in years. What on earth would she want with our house? I felt sick. Something was wrong. And I knew if I asked Tom, he'd just smile and pat my hand like I was being emotional. So I didn't ask. I called George. He picked up on the third ring. Lena, everything all right? I hesitated. Not exactly. Do you have time tomorrow to look at a document for me? Of course. Bring it by the office. Want to tell me what this is about? I'm not sure yet, I said softly. But I think my husband might be trying to take our house. George paused. Then his voice dropped. I'll see you at 10 a.m. I hung up, hands cold, heart pounding. I turned and looked at the hallway leading to our daughter's room. Mia was still asleep, her posters of Taylor Swift and butterflies taped to the wall. Whatever this was, it wasn't just about property. It was about protecting her, and I wasn't going to sit quietly and let someone take what I built for her future. George's office hadn't changed much in the 20 years since he helped my parents with their wills. Same wood-paneled walls, same brass desk lamp with the green glass shade, same faint smell of old paper and coffee grounds. It was comforting in a way, like walking into a time capsule of a world where people still shook hands and trusted their neighbors. He stood when I walked in, and for a second, I felt like a little girl again, visiting with my dad. But there was nothing childish about what I was holding in my purse. You look tired, George said, motioning for me to sit. I didn't sleep much, I admitted. I found something, and I don't know what it means, but it doesn't feel right. I handed him the folded document. He slipped on his glasses and read slowly, nodding a little as he went. His lips pressed into a thin line. When he looked up at me, his face had shifted, no longer the friendly old lawyer, but something sharper, more serious. Lena, where did you find this? In Tom's desk, I said quietly. Under a pile of mail. I took a picture. That's the original. He nodded again. You did the right thing bringing it here. This is a quitclaim deed, all right. And it's not for refinancing. I stared at him. Then what is it? It's exactly what it looks like. Tom is signing over the property to his sister. He's essentially giving her the house. No money exchanged, no liens listed, just a clean transfer. I felt my stomach twist. But how? I thought we owned it together. It's our house. He sighed. I remember when you bought that place, after your father passed. You used the inheritance, right? Every penny, I said. Tom didn't put anything in except maybe some paint and labor. I paid the down payment and the closing costs. George leaned back in his chair. Then you probably assumed your name was on the title. But unless you insisted on joint ownership and signed as a co-owner when the deed was filed, it's possible, especially back then, when you were grieving that Tom signed everything solo. My heart dropped. You're saying, I don't legally own my own home? He looked me dead in the eye. Not unless we can find your name on another document. I'll check county records to be sure. But this, he tapped the deed. This is bad, Lena. And if he files it, you're going to have one hell of a mess on your hands. I sat in stunned silence. Does Ellie know about this? I asked, finally. From the way this is drawn up? I bet she does. Or at least that she will soon. My throat tightened. I don't get it. Why would he do this? Why now? George looked at me for a long beat before answering. Because when someone thinks they own everything and assumes the other person won't fight back, they get bold and greedy and stupid. I stared down at my hands. My wedding ring caught the light, but it felt foreign on my finger, like it belonged to someone else. Lena, George said gently, you need to protect yourself. This is more than just paperwork. If he files this and you end up in a divorce or worse, you could be left with nothing. I nodded slowly. What do I do? First, he said, we freeze the property. I'll file a notice of dispute with the county clerk. It won't stop everything, but it'll make any transfer a lot more complicated. Then we start digging. I want to see the original purchase agreement, mortgage paperwork, any emails or texts that show your contribution. The more we can document your financial role, the better. Okay, I said, voice steadying. I'll get everything. George handed me a legal pad. Start writing down dates, payments, anything you remember. And Lena? Yeah? Don't confront him yet. Not until we're ready. If he knows you know, he might move faster. You need time to build your case. I left the office in a fog. The sun was too bright, the air too heavy. I sat in my car for a few minutes with the engine off, staring out at the sidewalk like it held answers. Back at home, I made lunch like nothing was wrong. Tom had gone out again, said he had errands to run, maybe grab a beer with a buddy. I didn't ask questions, didn't need to. My mind was moving in 1,000 directions, and I needed quiet to think. That night, after Mia went to bed, I asked Tom how his day went. He said fine, opened a bag of chips, and turned on the game. Just like that. Like nothing was wrong. Like he hadn't tried to sign away my life behind my back. I smiled, sat next to him on the couch, and watched the TV screen without really seeing it. He reached over and rested his hand on my leg. I didn't move, just kept smiling. Because George was right, I couldn't show my hand yet. Instead, I waited until Tom went to bed, then slipped into his office. I opened every drawer, checked every folder, snapped pictures of every document I didn't recognize. The house was quiet, except for the soft whir of the fan and the occasional creak in the floorboards. Then I saw an account statement from a bank I didn't recognize. The logo wasn't one of ours. The account name was T Holdings. I felt a chill spread through my chest. The balance was just over $62,000. I took a picture and backed out of the room quietly. Something was happening, something bigger than a shady signature. I didn't know where all the pieces led yet, but I was going to find out. The next morning, I woke up before anyone else and sat in the kitchen with a cup of black coffee. No cream, no sugar. I stared out the window at the backyard, where we'd just thrown our anniversary BBQ. The grass was still a little trampled from all the folding chairs and coolers. I used to love that view. Now it looked like the remains of a stage where someone had performed a lie. I kept thinking about the bank statement, Tay Holdings, and the $62,000 stat had never been mentioned, never shown up on our tax returns, and certainly never used for anything in our household budget. It was tucked away like a secret, like a getaway fund, or a payoff. Tom came into the kitchen a few minutes later, stretching like he'd just returned from a war. Not a peaceful night of snoring. Mourning, he said, opening the fridge. We out of creamer? Yeah, I replied, not looking at him. I'll grab some later. He poured himself black coffee like it was a punishment and took a seat across from me. You're quiet, I shrugged. Just thinking. About money, actually. That got his attention. What about it? I was wondering. Should we review our finances together? Just so I can learn how everything works. If something happened to you, I'd be lost. Tom smiled, but it was the kind that didn't reach his eyes. You don't need to worry about all that, babe. I've got it under control. I know, I said quickly, like I was agreeing, but still. For peace of mind. He leaned back in his chair, sipping his coffee. I guess. We can go over a few things tonight if you want. Perfect, I said, hiding the way my heart started racing. Because what I really wanted was to watch him lie to my face. That afternoon, while Mia was at her best friend's house, I called Kelsey, an old coworker from my accounting days who now worked in real estate. She was the type of friend who didn't ask too many questions when you said, "Can you meet me somewhere private?" We sat in her car in the parking lot of a quiet public library, engine off, windows cracked, 2 iced coffees sweating in the cup holders. I showed her the photos of the quitclaim deed, the bank account, and the emails I had quietly forwarded from Tom's laptop to a hidden email account I'd created. When I was done, Kelsey looked at me like she wasn't sure whether to hug me or call the cops. Lena, she said slowly, this looks like a setup. like he's planning something big. I don't think this is just about the house. I know, I said. That's why I need your help. Can you pull the title history on our property? I want to know how it's listed, if my name was ever on it, and if there have been any other transfers or pending actions. Kelsey didn't hesitate. Give me a day. And one more thing, I added. I want to know if he's been in contact with any agents, anyone poking around to list or sell the property. She raised an eyebrow. You think he's planning to sell? I think he's planning to leave. She didn't ask how I knew, just gave a quiet nod and squeezed my hand before I left. That night, Tom kept his word and pulled out the big binder we used to track our finances, though apparently most of it was his. He sat at the dining room table with a beer in one hand and a pen in the other. So, the mortgage is down to about $93,000, he said, flipping through pages. But the house is worth over $380,000 now. Maybe more. Wow, I said, playing along. That's great. Yeah. If we ever wanted to cash out, we could walk away with a pretty nice chunk of change. I smiled softly. Would we? He paused for a beat. What do you mean? I mean, would we walk away with it? Or would it go to your sister? Tom blinked, then laughed like I'd made a joke. What? Ellie? Come on. Where's that coming from? I shrugged. Just a silly thought. I overheard you talking to her the other day. Something about everything being in your name soon. He looked away. That was about some paperwork. It's nothing serious, but it's enough to talk about when you think I'm not listening? His jaw tightened. Lena, don't do this. You're reading too much into things. I leaned forward, locking eyes with him. You're right. Maybe I am, but humor me. Why is there a bank account under the name T. Holdings with over $60,000 in it? The way his face froze told me everything. You went through my things? He said sharply. You left them out, I replied calmly. I just noticed. That's private business. Private business in a marriage? He stood up, pacing now. I knew something was up. You've been acting different. I've been watching, I said simply. That's all. He stopped and turned toward me, trying to reel himself back in. Look, it's not what you think. Ellie needed some help with credit. I was trying to set something up in her name to make things easier for her. That's all. She's getting your help with a house you didn't pay for? His silence said more than words ever could. You want to leave, Tom? I asked quietly. You want a clean exit, cash in, hand Ellie the keys, and pretend this house wasn't built on me money? He didn't answer. I'm not stupid, I said. You've made me feel small for a long time, but I've never been stupid. I stood, walked over to him, and looked him dead in the eyes. You can either tell me the truth now, or I'll find out myself. But one way or another, this story isn't going to end the way you planned. Tom didn't say a word. He just walked into the kitchen, grabbed his keys, and left. I waited until the sound of his truck disappeared down the road before I grabbed my phone and texted George and Kelsey. He knows I know. Start phase 2. Tom didn't come home that night. He didn't text, didn't call, didn't even bother to check on Mia, who asked 3 times where her dad was before finally falling asleep watching TV on the couch. I told her he got caught up with work and promised he'd be home in the morning. It wasn't the first time I'd had to cover for him, but it was the first time I did it without feeling guilt or frustration. This time, I felt nothing but clarity. After Mia was asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and the notepad George had given me. I started writing, not just numbers and dates, but memories. The time we signed the initial purchase agreement, the moment I transferred the first $40,000 from the account my dad had set up for me. The day I found out we qualified for a lower mortgage rate because of me credit score. I listed it all not for nostalgia, but for evidence. The more I wrote, the more the numbness in my chest turned into something sharper. Not just anger, resolve. At 8:00 a.m. sharp, I met George at his office again. This time, he was waiting with a large binder. I pulled the county records, he said, motioning for me to sit. Your name was never added to the deed. Not when the house was bought, not after the renovations, not during the refi in 2018. I closed my eyes for a second. It stung, even though I already suspected it. But there's good news, he added. "We found the wire transfer receipt from your inheritance, dated 2 weeks before the down payment. We've also got a paper trail of you paying property taxes from your account until 2016. All of that establishes a claim, maybe not as a legal owner, but as a financial contributor. We can argue constructive ownership. Is that enough to stop him?" "Enough to make this very messy if he tries to move forward," George said, "and enough to scare off most buyers if he attempts to sell without your consent." I exhaled slowly. "Good." He leaned forward. "Are you still sure you don't want to confront him publicly? We could file an injunction, make this official." I shook my head. "Not yet. I want to see where he's going with this. Let him dig his hole." "Careful, Lena," he warned. "That kind of patience takes steel." I looked at him without blinking. I've had steel in me a long time. I just didn't know it. That afternoon, I met with Kelsey at a small cafe across town. She slid a manila envelope across the table without saying a word. I opened it to find 2 printed emails, both with Tom's name in the header. The first was a message to a real estate agent named Amber Dunn, asking about a quiet listing on our property. He'd written that he wanted to minimize legal complications with his soon-to-be ex-wife. The second was a calendar invite titled Divorce Strategy Meeting, Tay Holdings, scheduled for next Thursday with a local family law attorney. "Amber's a friend of a friend," Kelsey said softly. She got nervous when she saw his email and forwarded it to me. Off the record, my hands shook a little as I folded the papers. "He's not just planning to leave," I said. "He's planning to erase me." Kelsey reached out and placed a hand over mine. "Then it's time to make sure you leave him with nothing." That night, Tom came home smelling like whiskey and bad choices. His shirt was wrinkled, and he looked more annoyed than ashamed. "Your car wasn't in the driveway," he said, like he'd been waiting to pick a fight. "Where were you?" "Out," I said simply. "Running errands." "With who?" I turned around slowly. "Is this how it's going to be now? You come home after disappearing all night and start interrogating me?" He scoffed and grabbed a beer from the fridge. "I've just got a lot on my plate, all right." I noticed. Planning meetings, secret listings, new bank accounts. "You've been busy." His head snapped up, but I didn't flinch. I just stared. "You've been going through my stuff again?" "I'm your wife, Tom," I said. "Or at least I was. What do you think happens when you start trying to give away our house to your sister behind my back?" He looked stunned for just a second. Then that smug confidence returned. "It's not your house, Lena. Not legally." I stepped closer. "But you knew that I thought it was. You let me believe I was safe here. Let me spend years building a life, raising our daughter, paying bills while you were planning your exit." His voice rose. "Don't act like some innocent victim. You haven't worked in years. And you haven't earned anything I've given you in years," I fired back. "Including this house." We stared at each other in the heavy silence. Then he laughed bitterly. "Fine," he said. "You want a war? You'll get one. But don't expect sympathy from the court when they see the bills in my name and your empty resume." "I'm not scared of court," I said calmly. "You should be." He stormed off to the bedroom and slammed the door. I didn't follow. I sat back down at the table, opened my laptop, and typed up an email to George with the subject line, "Green light full action." Then I attached the photos of the emails from Amber, the meeting notice, the bank records, and every single payment I had ever made toward that house. The subject line of the email may have been professional, but in my heart, it meant something else entirely. Let's begin. The next morning, the air felt different. Crisp and clean like the world had shifted overnight. Tom had already left the house by the time I got up, probably off to that divorce strategy meeting or smoothing things over with Ellie. I didn't care where he was anymore. I was done waiting for him to play fair. I dropped Mia off at school like any other day, gave her a kiss on the forehead, and told her we'd get ice cream after dinner. She smiled and ran toward her friends. Just a normal Tuesday for her, at least. I planned to keep it that way. By 9:00 a.m., I was downtown in George's office, sitting across from him and a younger woman in a sleek, gray suit. Her name was Dana, one of the sharpest family law attorneys in the city. George had called in a favor. The look in her eyes told me she wasn't the type to get rattled. She was exactly what I needed. I reviewed everything George sent over, Dana said, flipping through the folder I'd handed her. You have a solid case for financial contribution and potential fraud, especially if he moved funds out of joint accounts without disclosure. The Tay Holdings Shell Company? That's going to be hard for him to justify. What happens next? I asked. We preemptively file a notice of intent to dispute any property transfer. And we lock down what's left of your joint assets. If you want to take it further, I'd recommend freezing the accounts tied to the house and formally contesting his attempted deed transfer. And if I do that? Dana smiled. Then we hit him with a restraining order on asset movement. That means he can't sell, gift, refinance, or otherwise touch the house until the matter is settled legally. Can we do that quietly? I asked. To a point, she said. It'll show up in public record eventually, but he won't know we've acted until his next move gets blocked. I leaned back in my chair, letting the weight of her words settle in. Do it, I said. Freeze everything. By that afternoon, the paperwork was filed. Kelsey had updated the title with a dispute flag at the county clerk's office, and George had contacted the bank that held our mortgage with a formal complaint. Tay Holdings would be under review by week's end. It felt like flipping the lock on a vault that Tom didn't know had a door. That evening, Tom came home earlier than usual, carrying takeout and a bottle of wine. It was his peace offering routine. I almost laughed at how predictable he'd become. Hey, he said casually, setting the bag on the kitchen counter. Thought I'd surprise you. Chinese from your favorite place. I kept my expression neutral. What's the occasion? He shrugged. I figured we could have a nice dinner, talk a little, clear the air. I raised an eyebrow. Clear the air, huh? After you tried to clear my name off our life? He smirked, but it was forced. Come on, Lena. Don't be dramatic. You know things have been tense. I just think we need to figure things out, like adults. I poured myself a glass of water. Funny. That's not what your meeting invite said. His face tightened, just for a second. You're reading my emails now? I'm reading everything, I said. And you know what's even more interesting? I tried to check our accounts today. You know the ones we used to pay the mortgage? Locked. Access denied. He blinked. Guess what else? I continued. Your little plan to slide the house over to Ellie hit a wall. County office flagged it for review. Wonder how that happened. His face turned red. What the hell did you do? I protected myself, I said, cool and calm, because apparently you weren't going to. He slammed his fist on the counter. You think you're going to take everything from me? No, I said. I'm taking back what was already mine. You tried to steal it. I built that house with my hands. And I bought it with my father's money. Paid the bills. Raised our child here. What did you do, Tom? Manage the lawn? His face crumpled for a moment. He hadn't expected this version of me, the one who didn't shrink under pressure. You're going to ruin everything. No, I said, stepping toward him. You already did that. I'm just cleaning up the mess. He stormed out without another word, slamming the front door so hard it shook the windows. I didn't chase him. Instead, I pulled out my phone and texted Dana. He knows. Prepare for escalation. Over the next 2 days, things got worse. Tom drained what little was left in our joint checking account. Only a few $100s, but enough to remind me he was still trying to win through pettiness. He called George's office twice, left messages for me pretending to be calm and reasonable. He even stopped by Mia's school during lunch and left her a stuffed animal just because. I didn't respond to any of it. The real blow came when Kelsey called me late Thursday evening. You're not going to believe this, she said. Tom tried to list the house through a different agent, a guy in his bowling league, and he got denied. The listing bounced back flagged because of the title dispute, but he's clearly still trying. Good, I said. Let him try. The more he pushes, the more evidence we get. By Friday morning, Dana had filed the formal asset protection order, and Tom was served with legal notice on his way out of the gym, no less. The look on his face must have been priceless. He showed up that evening, not yelling, not blustering, quiet, too quiet. We don't have to do this, he said in a low voice. I stood in the doorway, arms crossed. Yes, we do. You're going to drag this through court? If that's what it takes. We have a child, Lena. And she deserves to know her mother didn't let herself get walked all over. His expression broke then. For the first time in weeks, he looked afraid. Be smart, he said. You're not going to win this. I smiled, slow and steady. Tom, I already have. After Tom left that night, I stood in the quiet front hallway for a long time. The scent of spring was drifting in through the screen door, but the air inside felt heavy, like something had cracked open and the pieces hadn't landed yet. I wasn't scared anymore, just tired. Tired of pretending. Tired of being one half of something that only ever worked if I stayed small. Mia peeked around the corner of the stairs. Is Daddy mad? I knelt down, smoothing her hair back behind her ears. No, sweetheart. Daddy's just confused. Sometimes grown-ups go through hard stuff, and they don't always handle it right. She nodded solemnly, the way kids do when they know more than they're supposed to. Are you okay? I am now, I whispered. That weekend, I made a decision. I wasn't going to live on defense anymore. No more reacting to Tom's plans. No more waiting to see what he'd do next. It was time to shift the story. I met with Dana and George again on Monday morning. We sat in the conference room with fresh coffee and the folder Dana had labeled LC versus TMF, Phase 2. Are you ready? She asked. I'm more than ready, I said. Let's hit him where it hurts. Legally. Dana smiled. Then let's begin discovery. We're going after everything his bank accounts, shell companies, even that fishing cabin he bought with your Christmas bonus 3 years ago. I raised an eyebrow. He told me that was his uncle's. Well, the title says otherwise. By that afternoon, a subpoena had been filed for full financial disclosure, and the bank had flagged 3 more suspicious accounts under Tom's name, all opened within the past 8 months. One of them had a recent transfer for $18,000 labeled as Personal Separation Fund. Kelsey, meanwhile, had tracked down Amber Dunn, the real estate agent Tom had initially tried to list the house with. Turns out, Amber had worked with him on 2 other properties over the last year, including a small duplex he'd quietly co-signed with Ellie. You're telling me, I said slowly, he's been buying other real estate while pretending we were broke? Kelsey gave a short, dry laugh. Girl, he's been building a separate life, a safety net. Well, I said, he better hope it's flame retardant, because it's about to catch fire. I wasn't playing anymore. I was rebuilding. That week, I pulled my old laptop from the closet and reactivated the accounting software I hadn't touched since Mia was born. I updated my resume, contacted 3 former clients, and within 48 hours, I had my first small freelance job, helping a local florist reorganize her books. It wasn't a lot of money, but it felt like freedom. I even found a little storefront space for at least 5 blocks from Mia's school, something I could turn into a home office or part-time consulting spot. I wasn't just protecting myself now. I was reinventing. Tom, meanwhile, was unraveling. He tried to drain a retirement account he forgot had a spousal clause, meaning he needed my signature. When the request bounced back, he called me in a rage. You're trying to ruin me. No, I said calmly. I'm trying to stop you from ruining me. Big difference. He hung up on me. 2 days later, he sent a long email titled, Let's be civil about this. It opened with compliments about my intelligence and strength. Halfway through, he tried to negotiate a fair split of our assets. The house would stay in his name, of course. But he'd offer me $15,000 sand, continued shared parenting privileges, if I agreed not to press charges or contest the deed. I stared at the screen, blinking. $15,000. He thought my home, my inheritance, my entire adult life was worth less than a used Honda. I didn't reply. I forwarded the email to Dana, who responded 10 minutes later with, he just admitted guilt and motive. We'll use it. But it was the next email that nearly broke me. It came from Ellie. Subject: You're embarrassing yourself. I clicked it open, expecting more of her usual snide tone. But what I found was colder. Tom told me everything. You need to grow up, Lena. You didn't work for years, and now you're playing victim. This house was never yours. You were just living in it. Maybe it's time you start learning how the real world works. Some women would be grateful to have a man carry them this long. I sat there, staring at her words, my hands trembling not with fear, but rage. I stood, walked to the hallway closet, pulled down the heavy fireproof lockbox from the top shelf. Inside were old tax records, our marriage license, birth certificates, and a signed note from my dad, written just before he passed. I kept it sealed for years. Lena, this money isn't just for a home. It's for your freedom. Use it to build, not to stay stuck. I took a deep breath. I wasn't stuck anymore. That night, I called Dana. I want to press charges, I said. Fraud, if possible. I want to pursue spousal misconduct. And I want a formal cease and desist letter sent to Ellie. You sure? She asked. I'm done being quiet, I said. Let's make some noise. By the end of the week, we'd filed additional motions to freeze his personal assets and subpoena his communications with Ellie. Dana crafted a cease and desist so sharp it could slice steel. George filed paperwork contesting every single property Tom had bought since the year. We married because half of those down payments could be traced back to funds from more joint accounts. The storm was officially here, and I was finally the one controlling the forecast. It's funny how fast people can switch masks when they realize the game's no longer theirs. By Monday morning, Tom's tone had shifted again. Gone was the angry, chest-thumping alpha act. He called 3 times before noon, left 2 voicemails and a text that read, "Let's sit down and figure this out like grown-ups. No lawyers." No lawyers? That ship had sailed when he forged documents to give away my house. I didn't answer. Instead, I sat across from Dana at the courthouse, reviewing the final set of documents for the upcoming hearing. It wasn't a full divorce trial yet, but it was the kind of preliminary hearing that would define who had the power going forward. Our goal? Get a formal injunction on all his financial accounts and place a protective order on the home to stop any further attempt at sale, transfer, or refinancing. His side hasn't responded to our last request for disclosure, Dana said, flipping through a stack of papers, which means either he's hiding something or he's gotten cold feet. I'm betting both, I replied. Dana looked up and smiled. You know, I see a lot of women in your shoes. Some fall apart when they find out what their husbands are doing behind their backs. But you, she shook her head, impressed you built a war room. I let out a soft laugh. I didn't know I had it in me, but I guess years of being dismissed kind of builds pressure, and pressure either breaks you or turns you into something sharp. She nodded. You're sharp, all right. Let's go get your house back. We walked into the hearing like we were walking into a boardroom, confident, calm, and loaded with facts. Tom was already there, sitting at the table with a lawyer. I didn't recognize some guy in a wrinkled gray suit who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Tom didn't even look at me when we passed. He just stared down at the table like maybe it would swallow him. The judge, a woman with silver hair and a gaze that could cut glass, took her seat and flipped open the folder. Let's begin, she said. And just like that, my whole life was under review. Dana spoke first, walking the judge through the timeline, my financial contributions, the inheritance, the shell accounts, the fake deed to Ellie. Every point was backed with documentation. Every accusation had proof. At one point, the judge looked directly at Tom and asked, "Did you inform your wife before initiating these financial actions?" He fidgeted. It wasn't personal. It was strategic. Strategic. That one word probably did more damage to his case than anything we said. It showed intent, planning, deception. By the end of the hearing, the judge issued a formal freeze on all real estate assets and ordered Tom to produce full financial disclosures within 10 business days. She also granted my request for temporary exclusive residence of the house, meaning he had to move out. Tom stood there with his mouth slightly open, like he couldn't process what just happened. I didn't gloat. I just nodded once, turned on my heels, and walked out. Outside, Dana let out a breath. That went better than I hoped. He'll fight back, I said. This isn't over. No, she agreed. But now he's the one on defense, and that's a very different kind of game. When I got home, the house felt different, lighter, like it was breathing again. I sat on the couch, looked around the living room I once decorated with hand-me-downs and garage sale finds, and felt the strange mix of heartbreak and pride. This was still my home, even if it had been a battleground. 2 days later, Tom texted me. I'm staying at Kyle's for now. Can I pick up a few things this weekend? I replied with a time and a list of what he was allowed to take. Anything else would go through legal channels. That Saturday, he showed up at noon. He looked tired, older, not the man who used to hold court at backyard barbecues. He didn't say much as he packed a duffel bag in the bedroom. I stood nearby, watching, not because I didn't trust him, but because I didn't. On his way out, he stopped by the front door and turned. This is really happening, huh? I didn't answer. He let out a breath. You're not the same woman I married. No, I said quietly. I'm not. That woman trusted you. This one doesn't. He nodded slowly. I never thought you'd fight me like this. I never thought you'd betray me like this. For a second, he looked like he might say something real, something honest, but whatever it was stayed locked behind his clenched jaw. He just nodded again and walked out. I locked the door behind him. That night, I tucked Mia into bed and sat beside her a little longer than usual. She looked up at me, eyes wide. Is Daddy moving out for real? I nodded. Yes, baby, but it's not your fault. And he still loves you. This is just something that had to happen. She was quiet for a moment. Are you sad? I thought about that. Not really, I said. I think I was sad for a long time. Now I'm just getting better. She smiled and pulled the covers up to her chin. You're really strong, Mom. I kissed her forehead. So are you. Later that night, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea and stared out into the quiet neighborhood. The same neighbors who once waved at Tom and me like we were the perfect couple now whispered behind trimmed hedges. I didn't care. Let them whisper. Let them wonder what happened. Because one day, I might just tell them. The following week was quieter than I expected. No surprise visits, no angry texts from Tom, no cryptic emails from Ellie. It felt eerie, almost, like the calm before the next storm. But this time, I wasn't scared of what might be coming. I was ready. I filled my days with rebuilding. I met with 2 new clients for bookkeeping work, small businesses in town, both women run. One of them, a florist named Rhonda, reminded me a lot of myself, smart, tired, and learning how to start over. We laughed over coffee and receipts, and when I told her I was fresh out of a marital ambush, she just smiled knowingly and said, We're tougher than we look. At home, I began clearing out the clutter. Not just Tom's things, although I boxed up the last of his junk and put it in the garage, but everything that felt like it belonged to a version of me that didn't exist anymore. Clothes I hadn't worn since before Mia was born. Decorations I only hung because Tom liked them. Old photos I no longer needed to keep on display. Every drawer I emptied felt like I was reclaiming more space inside myself. And then came the certified letter. It arrived in a stiff white envelope from a new law firm, one I didn't recognize. The return address was downtown. When I opened it, my stomach dropped. Tom was contesting the protective order on the house. The letter claimed that I had manipulated the legal system and was obstructing fair access to marital property. It painted me as bitter, vengeful, emotionally unstable. The kind of letter written not for truth, but for intimidation. I brought it straight to Dana, who read it once and rolled her eyes. This is textbook scare tactic, she said, tossing it onto her desk. He's trying to push you into settling before discovery pulls out more of his skeletons. I'm not settling, I said firmly. Good, Dana replied, because this tells me we've got him cornered. She filed a formal response within 24 hours. It wasn't just a rebuttal, it was a warning shot. Along with it, she submitted a motion to access communication records between Tom and Ellie, including text messages and emails. We were going after their full conspiracy now. I went home that evening and sat with Mia on the couch, watching old cartoons and sharing popcorn. She leaned against me with that effortless trust kids have, like she knew I'd always be there to catch her even when the world around us changed. "Do you miss Daddy?" she asked after a long pause. I didn't lie. "Sometimes." She nodded. "I don't like when you fight." "I know, baby," I whispered, holding her tighter. But sometimes grown-ups have to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. Her little hand found mine. "I think you're doing the right thing." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "So do I." That weekend, I met Kelsey at the office space I'd been thinking about leasing. It was nothing fancy, about 500 square feet, with big windows and scuffed tile floors, but it had good bones. And it was mine. I say, "Go for it," Kelsey said, walking the space with me. "You've already got more clients than half the consultants in town." I nodded. "It's not just about work. It's about putting something back together, starting fresh." She grinned. "Then do it. And when you open, I'll be your first customer." That night, I signed the lease. 1 year, monthly payments within reach, and a quiet little key that sat in my palm like a promise. Meanwhile, Tom's silence didn't last long. 3 days later, George called with an update. We received a notification that Tom tried to liquidate an investment account tied to the duplex he co-signed with Ellie. The bank flagged it because of our legal block. And he flipped. Sent their lawyer a ranting email. Said he was being strangled by his ex. "Good," I said. "Let him squirm." But it was what George said next that made me sit up straight. We also got a tip. A paralegal at Tom's lawyer's office forwarded us a file off the record. It includes emails between Tom and Ellie. About the house? Worse. About staging a financial hardship claim. They were planning to argue that you left the marriage voluntarily and that he was struggling to maintain the property on his own. I blinked. That's a lie. He was funneling money into fake accounts. He was planning this months ago. Exactly, George said. And now we've got proof. Those emails are time-stamped. They go back nearly a year. My hands trembled as I hung up. This wasn't just personal anymore. It was calculated, cold. He hadn't just been planning to leave. He'd been planning to erase me. I forwarded the emails to Dana. Her reply came 10 minutes later. "Game over. We're going for everything." I didn't smile. I didn't feel triumphant. What I felt was something deeper, something steadier. Vindication. That night, I sat on the porch again. Same spot, same cup of tea. The neighborhood was quiet, except for the occasional bark of a dog or the low hum of a distant lawnmower. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of what was coming next. I was ready for it. Whatever Tom had left to throw at me, I could take it. Because now, I wasn't the woman hoping for peace. I was the woman prepared for war and winning. Absolutely. Here's main idea 8, picking up directly from the emotional shift Lena experiences after reclaiming her home and flipping the power dynamic. The following week was quieter than I expected. No surprise visits, no angry texts from Tom, no cryptic emails from Ellie. It felt eerie, almost, like the calm before the next storm. But this time, I wasn't scared of what might be coming. I was ready. I filled my days with rebuilding. I met with 2 new clients for bookkeeping work, small businesses in town, both women-run. One of them, a florist named Rhonda, reminded me a lot of myself. Smart, tired, and learning how to start over. We laughed over coffee and receipts, and when I told her I was fresh out of a marital ambush, she just smiled knowingly and said, "We're tougher than we look." At home, I began clearing out the clutter. Not just Tom's things, although I boxed up the last of his junk and put it in the garage, but everything that felt like it belonged to a version of me that didn't exist anymore. Clothes I hadn't worn since before Mia was born. Decorations I only hung because Tom liked them. Old photos I no longer needed to keep on display. Every drawer I emptied felt like I was reclaiming more space inside myself. And then came the certified letter. It arrived in a stiff white envelope from a new law firm, one I didn't recognize. The return address was downtown. When I opened it, my stomach dropped. Tom was contesting the protective order on the house. The letter claimed that I had manipulated the legal system and was obstructing fair access to marital property. It painted me as bitter, vengeful, emotionally unstable. The kind of letter written not for truth, but for intimidation. I brought it straight to Dana, who read it once and rolled her eyes. "This is textbook scare tactic," she said, tossing it onto her desk. "He's trying to push you into settling before discovery pulls out more of his skeletons." "I'm not settling," I said firmly. "Good," Dana replied, "because this tells me we've got him cornered." She filed a formal response within 24 hours. It wasn't just a rebuttal, it was a warning shot. Along with it, she submitted a motion to access communication records between Tom and Ellie, including text messages and emails. We were going after their full conspiracy now. I went home that evening and sat with Mia on the couch, watching old cartoons and sharing popcorn. She leaned against me with that effortless trust kids have, like she knew I'd always be there to catch her even when the world around us changed. "Do you miss Daddy?" she asked after a long pause. I didn't lie. "Sometimes." She nodded. "I don't like when you fight." "I know, baby," I whispered, holding her tighter. "But sometimes grown-ups have to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard." Her little hand found mine. "I think you're doing the right thing." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "So do I." That weekend, I met Kelsey at the office space I'd been thinking about leasing. It was nothing fancy, about 500 square feet, with big windows and scuffed tile floors, but it had good bones. And it was mine. "I say go for it," Kelsey said, walking the space with me. "You've already got more clients than half the consultants in town." I nodded. "It's not just about work. It's about putting something back together, starting fresh." She grinned. "Then do it. And when you open, I'll be your first customer." That night, I signed the lease. 1 year, monthly payments within reach, and a quiet little key that sat in my palm like a promise. Meanwhile, Tom's silence didn't last long. 3 days later, George called with an update. We received a notification that Tom tried to liquidate an investment account tied to the duplex he co-signed with Ellie. The bank flagged it because of our legal block, and he flipped. Sent their lawyer a ranting email, said he was being strangled by his ex. "Good," I said. "Let him squirm." But it was what George said next that made me sit up straight. We also got a tip. A paralegal at Tom's lawyer's office forwarded us a file off the record. It includes emails between Tom and Ellie. About the house? Worse, about staging a financial hardship claim. They were planning to argue that you left the marriage voluntarily and that he was struggling to maintain the property on his own. I blinked. That's a lie. He was funneling money into fake accounts. "He was planning this months ago." "Exactly," George said. "And now we've got proof. Those emails are time-stamped. They go back nearly a year." My hands trembled as I hung up. This wasn't just personal anymore. It was calculated, cold. He hadn't just been planning to leave. He'd been planning to erase me. I forwarded the emails to Dana. Her reply came 10 minutes later. "Game over. We're going for everything." I didn't smile. I didn't feel triumphant. What I felt was something deeper, something steadier. Vindication. That night, I sat on the porch again. Same spot, same cup of tea. The neighborhood was quiet, except for the occasional bark of a dog or the low hum of a distant lawnmower. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of what was coming next. I was ready for it. Whatever Tom had left to throw at me, I could take it, because now I wasn't the woman hoping for peace. I was the woman prepared for war and winning. The court date was set for a Thursday morning. Final hearing for the property dispute, plus preliminary findings on the spousal misconduct and financial fraud claims. Dana called it the real showdown. I called it the day he finally gets to see who I am now. The week leading up to it was a blur of motion. Paperwork, strategy calls, late night organizing, and early mornings spent reviewing every document and timeline George and Dana had put together. I knew it front to back. Every dollar, every date, every lie Tom had told, and I was ready to lay it bare. But Tom didn't wait until Thursday to show his hand. On Tuesday afternoon, I got a knock at the door. It was Ellie. She stood there on my front porch, in oversized sunglasses and wedge sandals, like she was just there to borrow sugar, but her mouth was tight and her tone colder than the wind. "I figured it was time we talked," she said. "I didn't move. We don't have anything to talk about." She pulled off her sunglasses and gave me a look I knew too well. Arrogant, condescending, fake sympathetic. "Tom's a mess," she said. "He's not eating. He's drinking too much. He's falling apart." I folded my arms. "That's not my problem anymore." She stepped closer. "You're trying to destroy him." "No," I said. "I'm trying to stop him from stealing what isn't his." "You mean we were trying to steal, right? You and your brother." She didn't answer that. Instead, she shifted tactics. "You're hurting Mia. Do you even realize that? All this court stuff, the tension, it's tearing her up. Kids feel it, Lena." I kept my voice steady. "What Mia feels is a mother who's finally standing up for herself. If that's uncomfortable for you, you're welcome to leave my property." She stared at me, jaw clenched, but I didn't blink. "I hope you're proud of yourself," she snapped, "because when this is over and you're sitting in that little empty house all alone, you'll realize you didn't win anything." I smiled thinly. "Funny. That's what your brother thought too." Then I shut the door. I stood there for a moment, hand still on the knob, heart pounding not from fear, but from the rush of holding my ground. No yelling, no screaming, no tears, just control. Wednesday came and went in silence. Tom didn't call. Ellie didn't return. I took Mia out for ice cream after school, and we laughed about how she accidentally dropped her cone but caught it with the napkin before it hit the ground. Small wins, precious wins. The kind that made everything else worth it. Then Thursday arrived. Dana met me outside the courthouse just after 8 a.m., sharp in a navy blue suit and heels that clicked with every step like punctuation marks. She looked at me, gave a nod. "You ready?" I've never been more ready. Inside, the courtroom was full. Tom sat at the defendant's table with 2 lawyers. Now he'd hired a second attorney, someone with divorce and property disputes on their website and a reputation for being aggressive. I expected him to look smug, but instead, he looked pale, nervous. He knew what was coming. The judge took her seat and began the proceedings. Dana stood and delivered a masterful opening statement, clear and direct, detailing the ways Tom had misrepresented financial information, concealed assets, and attempted to illegally transfer joint marital property to a third party without consent. She cited case law. She handed over copies of the emails between him and Ellie. She showed the paper trail of the fake accounts and shell companies. Then came the kicker, a recorded phone call. Dana had reached out to one of the banks Tom had used for his private accounts, and the customer service rep had legally recorded one of his conversations. In it, Tom could be heard explaining that the wife won't know anything's missing and that he was prepping for a clean exit. The courtroom went silent. Even his own lawyer looked rattled. Then the judge turned to Tom. "Would you like to respond?" Tom stood slowly, cleared his throat, and for the first time in all of this, I saw him shake. I didn't mean to hurt anyone," he began. "I just didn't think Lena would fight like this. I thought she'd move on, and that justified transferring her home to your sister without consent?" the judge asked. Unimpressed, Tom stammered. "It wasn't about stealing. It was about simplifying things." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Simplifying fraud?" Dana gave me a small smile. 2 hours later, the judge delivered her ruling. The house would be awarded to me, solely, full ownership. Any and all attempts to transfer, refinance, or list the home under Tom's name were now considered invalid. Furthermore, the court ordered a full forensic audit of Tom's financial holdings. If further misconduct was discovered, criminal charges could be recommended. Outside the courthouse, I stood on the steps and took my first deep breath in what felt like a year. Dana hugged me briefly. "You just set a precedent," she said. "Not just legally, but for yourself." I looked out over the parking lot and smiled. Let's hope he finally gets the message. Tom walked by on the far end of the sidewalk, flanked by his lawyers. He glanced at me once. No smugness, no fire, just a broken kind of silence. And I let him walk away, not with rage, but with peace. because I had something he would never get back: my integrity, my home, my freedom. And I earned every inch of it. Life after the courtroom didn't suddenly become perfect, but it became mine. The weeks that followed were filled with transitions. Tom moved out of state not long after the ruling. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that he was staying with a cousin in Arizona, trying to start over. Ellie vanished back into whatever circle of entitlement she slithered from. No apology ever came, no accountability, just silence. And, honestly, that was fine with me. I didn't want closure from them. I wanted peace, and I had it now. The house felt different, not just because he was gone, but because I'd taken back every inch of it. I painted the bedroom a soft green, ripped out the old curtains he insisted were practical, and put up airy ones that made the morning light feel gentle again. I donated his leftover tools, the grill he used like a trophy, even the sports memorabilia he swore would go up in value. I kept one thing: a photo of the three of us from when Mia was a baby. Not because I missed him, but because it was real. And not every piece of our past had to be poisoned. I started hosting Sunday dinners again, just me, Mia, and sometimes Kelsey or Rhonda from the shop. We'd cook together, talk about work, school, plans. No tension, no fake smiles, just warmth. Mia bloomed too. The more the house softened, the more she came back to life. She laughed more, slept better, started drawing again. One night, while we were doing dishes, she said, "I think the house is happier now." I looked at her and nodded. I think so too. Work picked up faster than I expected. Word got around that I was doing freelance accounting again, and within a month, I had to make a waiting list. I kept the office small, intimate, enough to stay busy, not enough to feel overwhelmed. I wanted balance this time, control. I wanted to build something sustainable, not just for the money, but for the sense of self that I'd lost in the years of being just a wife. And every so often, I'd sit in the quiet, no music, no TV, just the sound of the breeze through the window, and think back to the moment this all started. That BBQ. That smile Tom wore when he toasted to a future he thought he owned. That piece of paper I found tucked under junk mail, the quitclaim deed that almost erased me. It was hard not to wonder what might have happened if I'd ignored it, if I'd believed him, if I'd done what I'd been taught to do for so long, keep the peace. But I didn't. I stood up, and it changed everything. People ask me sometimes quietly, carefully, if I regretted how it all played out. Friends who used to come over with their husbands, neighbors who stopped inviting me to couples' barbecues, folks from church who hadn't quite figured out whose side they should be on. I told them the truth. I don't regret fighting for myself. I regret how long it took me to believe I was worth fighting for. Because that was the real loss. Not the money, not the marriage. The years I spent believing my value depended on being agreeable, quiet, convenient. But not anymore. One morning, about 3 months after the ruling, I got a letter in the mail. No return address. The handwriting was sloppy but familiar. It was from Tom. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't apologize. Not really. Just a few lines about how he was trying to figure things out, and never meant for it to go so far. He asked how Mia was, asked if I'd let him call her sometime. I read it once, folded it neatly, and placed it in the drawer beside my bed. I didn't write back right away. I needed to think, not out of spite, but because Mia deserved better than half-hearted attempts and broken promises. I brought it up to her gently, a week later, told her her dad had reached out, wanted to talk. She was quiet, then nodded. "Okay, but only if you're on the phone too." And so, one evening we called. Just 15 minutes. Polite, careful, surface level. Mia told him about her school project. He asked if she still liked art. She said yes. Then we said goodbye. It was enough for now. He was still her father. I wouldn't take that from her. But I'd built a life now where he didn't get to take anything else from me. That night, after she went to bed, I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and sat at the kitchen island, just like I had the night I found the deed. Same spot, same quiet. Only this time, there was no fear in me. Just space. Just strength. And I realized something. This wasn't just survival. It was a full circle reclaiming of my home, my voice, my worth. I looked around at the house mine now, legally, emotionally, spiritually, and smiled. I hadn't just won. I had become the woman I once needed. And I knew that if the day ever came when Mia faced something like this, some betrayal, some lie, some twisting of the truth, to make her feel small, she wouldn't wonder what to do. She'd remember her mother, and she'd fight like hell, too. Sometimes, the greatest strength comes not from standing your ground, but from realizing you have a ground to stand on. Lena's story isn't just about betrayal or legal battles, it's about rediscovering the quiet power that so many women, especially in long marriages, are taught to downplay. She believed in her home, her family, and the idea that loyalty would be enough. But when that trust was broken, she didn't fall apart, she rose. For many in our generation, we were taught to endure, to make peace, keep the home running, and avoid conflict. But Lena's journey reminds us that dignity and self-respect are not loud, they are steady. They are earned. And they are ours to protect, no matter how long we've spent putting others first. This story isn't just a cautionary tale. It's a tribute to the resilience so many older women carry quietly in their bones. It's never too late to reclaim what's rightfully yours, whether that's your home, your voice, or your peace of mind. Because at the end of the day, survival is admirable, but self-worth, that's freedom. And no one, not even someone you once loved, has the right to take that from you.